The morning sun, a generous golden spill, poured through the large window of my sewing room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and warming the rich floral pattern of the fabric draped over my cutting table. At 72, my fingers weren't as nimble as they once were, but they still knew their way around a needle and thread, coaxing beauty from raw material. Today, it was a pale blue silk, destined to become a graduation dress for my granddaughter, Sarah. I'd spent countless hours in this room, the hum of my sewing machine a constant companion, stitching not just clothes, but dreams, hopes, and a lifetime of love into every seam. My name is Alma Mitchell, and for as long as I could remember, my life had been a tapestry woven with the threads of my family's needs. Sarah's dress brought back a flood of memories, each one a testament to the sacrifices I'd made. I remembered the year Ethan, my eldest, turned 18. He'd dreamt of going to business school, a dream that felt impossibly expensive on a seamstress's income. But I'd worked double shifts, taken on extra commissions, and dipped into the small savings my late husband, Arthur, and I had put aside. Ethan, now 45, a successful entrepreneur, rarely mentioned those early struggles or my part in them. Then there was Julia, my middle child, 42 now. When her youngest, Lily, had a sudden medical emergency a few years back, it was my savings that covered the specialist bills her insurance wouldn't touch. Julia had been so grateful then, her eyes brimming with tears as she hugged me tight. And Phil, my youngest, 40, the artist, his bohemian lifestyle often meant he was short on rent or needed materials for his latest project. I'd always sent him a little something, never wanting to see his creative spirit dimmed by financial worries. Even family vacations, those cherished memories of sandy beaches and laughter, had often been quietly subsidized by me. A little extra cash slipped into their hands for spending money. It wasn't just money, though. My home was the family hub. Every Sunday, the smell of my roast chicken and apple pie would draw them all in. I'd babysit the grandchildren whenever asked, often at the last minute, rearranging my own schedule without a second thought. Grandma Alma always knows what to do, they'd say, seeking my advice on everything from broken hearts to leaky faucets. I was the rock, the constant, the one who always had an answer, or at least a warm cup of tea and a listening ear. Over the years, the casual mentions of my financial contributions started to grate, ever so slightly. At gatherings, I'd hear Ethan's wife, Lydia, 38, chuckle, "Oh, just ask Alma, she's the family bank," or Julia teasing, "Mom, can you just wire me a little something, from your secret stash?" They'd laugh, and I'd force a smile, pretending it was all in good fun. But beneath the surface, a tiny seed of unease had been planted. It wasn't the money itself, but the assumption, the casual entitlement that had begun to sprout. They never asked if I could help, only when and how much. Just last month, at Ethan's annual summer barbecue, I'd been sitting on the patio, enjoying the warm evening air. The conversation drifted from the latest stock market news to the rising cost of living. I heard Ethan's voice, a little too loud. Honestly, with Mom's house and her savings, she's sitting on a small fortune. It's a good thing we're here to help her manage it, right? Julia chimed in. Yeah, she's not getting any younger. We need to make sure everything's in order. Lydia, usually more reserved, added, "It's just practical. She's so frail sometimes." Their words, though not overtly malicious, felt like tiny needles pricking at my skin. Frail? I just spent the entire afternoon chasing Sarah and her cousins around the yard. Manage it? I'd managed my finances perfectly well for 7 decades. The murmurs of my age and fragility, the quiet assumptions about my capabilities, lingered long after the barbecue ended, echoing ominously in the quiet of my home. A chill, unrelated to the evening breeze, had settled in my heart. The chill that settled in my heart after Ethan's barbecue didn't thaw. Instead, it deepened with each passing week. What had once been subtle hints of entitlement now began to manifest as outright dismissiveness. It started small, almost imperceptibly. I'd called Julia, suggesting our usual Sunday dinner, a tradition I'd upheld for decades. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry," she'd say, her voice a little too bright. "Lily has a soccer tournament, and then we're just so exhausted. Maybe next week?" Next week would bring another excuse, then another. Ethan, of course, was always too busy with work or traveling for a deal. Phil, bless his artistic soul, was often unreachable, lost in his own creative world, and when he did surface, it was usually with a vague promise to catch up soon. My invitations, once eagerly accepted, now felt like burdens. I tried to brush it off, telling myself they were just busy, that life moved faster for the younger generation. But the truth gnawed at me. I was still here, still cooking, still ready to listen, but they weren't coming. Then came my 73rd birthday. I hadn't expected a grand celebration, but a simple family dinner, a cake, a few heartfelt wishes would have meant the world. I waited. The phone rang, but it was Clara, my dear friend, a retired school teacher, calling to wish me well. "Happy birthday, Alma. What are your plans?" she asked cheerfully. I mumbled something about a quiet day, a book, a cup of tea. My children called later that evening, each with a perfunctory, "Happy birthday, Mom." Ethan's was a quick voicemail, Julia's a rushed call between errands, and Phil's a text message with a string of emojis. No mention of getting together, no plans to celebrate, not even a card. The silence that followed those brief acknowledgments felt louder than any party. A few days later, Julia called, her voice laced with a familiar exasperation. "Mom, can you do me a huge favor? Ethan and Lydia are hosting a big get-together for his new business partners next Saturday. It's a really important networking thing, and we need Lily and Sarah out of the house. Can you take them for the night?" My heart sank. They couldn't spare an hour for my birthday, but they expected me to drop everything to provide free childcare for their convenience. I wanted to say no, to finally put my foot down, but the old habits were too ingrained. "Of course, dear," I heard myself say, the words tasting like ash. "Bring them over whenever you like." The girls arrived, bright-eyed and full of energy, and for a few hours, their innocent chatter filled the void. But as I tucked them into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being used, of being valuable only for what I could provide, not for who I was. The next day, Ethan called, not to thank me, but to ask if I could lend him a few $1,000s for a temporary cash flow issue with his business. "It's just for a month or two, Mom," he said, his voice smooth and persuasive. "You know how these things go, and you're not really using that money, are you?" I felt a tremor of anger, a rare emotion for me. "Ethan," I started, trying to keep my voice even, "that money is for my own security. I'm 73 now." He scoffed lightly. "Mom, come on. You're not going to be around much longer, are you? What do you need it for? We'll make sure you're taken care of. It's just sitting there." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not going to be around much longer. He said it so casually, as if discussing the weather. It wasn't a question of concern, but a calculation, a dismissal of my very existence. I felt my hands tremble, clutching the phone tighter. "I'll think about it, Ethan," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. I hung up before he could press further, the receiver feeling heavy in my hand. A few weeks later, another family picnic was organized, this time at the community park. I wasn't asked to host or even to bring a dish, just to come if I felt up to it. I arrived a little early, carrying a small fruit salad I'd made anyway, hoping to contribute. The park was already bustling with my family. Children shrieked with laughter, chasing each other near the swings. Ethan was holding court by the barbecue, flipping burgers, surrounded by Julia, Lydia, and a few other relatives. Phil was off to the side, sketching in a notebook, seemingly oblivious. I walked over, fruit salad in hand, and offered it to Julia. "Oh, Mom, you didn't have to," she said, taking it with a distracted air, already turning back to a conversation with Lydia about vacation plans. No one offered me a chair. No one asked me how I was. I stood there for a few awkward minutes, feeling invisible, before finding an empty bench under a distant oak tree. From my solitary perch, I watched them, my children, my grandchildren, all laughing, sharing stories, a vibrant tableau of family life. But I was outside of it, a silent observer. I saw Ethan throw his head back in laughter, Julia affectionately ruffle her son's hair, Lydia lean into Ethan with a smile. They were a unit, a family, and I, their matriarch, was a forgotten piece of the scenery. A profound, aching pang of betrayal pierced through me. It wasn't just neglect, it was an active exclusion, a deliberate forgetting. They didn't see me as their mother, their grandmother, the woman who had poured her entire life into them. They saw me as a relic, a burden, someone whose time was almost up, whose assets were merely waiting to be distributed. The sun, once a comfort, now felt like a spotlight on my isolation. I was a threadbare quilt, discarded and forgotten, and the realization was a bitter pill to swallow. A few weeks after the picnic, the phone rang. It was Julia, her voice unusually solicitous. "Mom, Ethan and I were talking, and we're really worried about you. You know, with everything going on, and you being, well, you know." Her voice trailed off, but I knew what she meant. Old, frail, not long for this world. "We think it would be a good idea to set up a family trust, just to make sure everything's taken care of, for your peace of mind." Ethan got on the line then, his tone more authoritative. "It's for your protection, Mom. We've talked to a lawyer, a really good one, and he says it's the smartest way to manage your assets. It'll make things so much easier for everyone down the line, and you won't have to worry about a thing." They painted a picture of togetherness, of a united front, looking out for my best interests. They spoke of future planning and avoiding probate, words that sounded responsible and wise. My mind, still reeling from the sting of the picnic and Ethan's casual dismissal of my lifespan, was vulnerable. I wanted to believe them, to believe that this was a genuine act of love and concern, not another step in their slow, quiet exclusion. "We'll all be beneficiaries, of course," Julia added, and you'll still have access to everything. It's just managed differently. I remembered Arthur, my late husband, and his unwavering belief in family. Always be generous, Alma, he'd often said, his hand warm in mine, especially to those you love. Family is everything. His voice, a gentle whisper from the past, seemed to encourage me now. He had loved our children fiercely, and I knew he would have wanted them to be secure. Perhaps this was just a modern way of ensuring that security, a way for them to show they cared, even if their recent actions had felt otherwise. A few days later, they arrived at my house, Ethan carrying a thick folder of documents. Julia was by his side, looking a little uncomfortable, but nodding along to Ethan's explanations. Lydia was there too, surprisingly quiet, her eyes occasionally flicking to mine with an unreadable expression. Phil was predictably absent. It's all pretty standard, Mom, Ethan said, spreading the papers across my dining table. Just a few signatures. It basically puts your assets into a trust, with us as the trustees. It means we can help you make financial decisions, pay your bills, that sort of thing. It's really just a formality, a safety net. He pointed to various lines, explaining legal jargon in a way that sounded reassuring, but was ultimately vague. My eyes scanned the dense paragraphs, but the legal language blurred together. I trusted my children. I had always trusted them. They were my flesh and blood, the very reason I had worked so hard, sacrificed so much. The idea of them actively trying to manipulate me felt too cruel, too unthinkable. So, I'll still have access to my money, I asked, a faint tremor in my voice. Of course, Mom, Julia chimed in quickly, perhaps sensing my hesitation. It's still your money. We're just helping you manage it, like Ethan said. Think of it as a team effort. Ethan smiled, a practiced, confident smile. Exactly, and it protects you from any unforeseen circumstances. You know, if you ever got sick or needed long-term care, we'd be able to handle everything seamlessly. I picked up the pen, my hand feeling heavy. A mix of pride and anxiety swirled within me. Pride that my children were, in their own way, looking out for me. Anxiety about this new, unfamiliar territory. But Arthur's voice echoed again, urging generosity, trust. I remembered all the times I'd helped them, all the times I'd put their needs before my own. This was just another extension of that, wasn't it? A way for them to finally give back, to take some of the burden off my shoulders. With a deep breath, I signed the papers, my signature firm, despite the slight tremor in my hand. Ethan gathered the documents with a triumphant air, a glint in his eye I didn't quite catch at the time. Julia gave me a quick, almost apologetic hug. Lydia remained silent, her gaze still unreadable. As they left, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with a lingering unease. I had unknowingly stepped into the trap, believing I was being cared for, when in reality I had just handed over the reins of my own life. The summer air hung heavy and humid, thick with the smell of grilling meat and blooming honeysuckle. It was Ethan's annual barbecue, again, a few months after I'd signed those trust papers. I arrived early, as always, hoping to help set things up, but found everything already in motion. Ethan was by the grill, a beer in hand, directing Julia and Lydia on where to put the salads. Phil was nowhere to be seen, which wasn't unusual. I tried to engage, offering to slice the tomatoes or set out the plates, but my offers were met with polite but firm rejections. No, Mom, "We've got it," Julia said, not even looking up from arranging a platter of cheese. "Just relax." Relaxing, I found, was a lonely endeavor when everyone else was bustling with purpose. I settled onto a patio chair, a little apart from the main group, watching my grandchildren chase each other across the lawn. Sarah, now 16, was laughing. Her bright blue dress from her middle school graduation a few months ago, already a distant memory. Lily, Julia's youngest, was attempting to climb a tree, her small legs scrambling. My heart swelled with a familiar love, a love that felt increasingly unreciprocated. The adults drifted inside, seeking refuge from the heat, their voices carrying through the open sliding glass door. I could hear them, a low murmur at first, then distinct words. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their voices, particularly Ethan's, had a way of cutting through the ambient noise. "Honestly," Ethan began, his voice a little slurred, "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up. The trust is great, but it's still hair money, technically, and she keeps asking about it." Julia's voice, hesitant. "She's just curious, Ethan. She's always been careful with money." "Careful? She's practically hoarding it," Ethan scoffed. "What does she need it for? She's 73. For crying out loud. She barely leaves the house. It's not like she's going to suddenly take up skydiving." A ripple of laughter followed his comment. Then Lydia spoke, her voice softer. "She did sign the papers, Ethan. She trusts us." "Exactly," Ethan seized on her words. "She trusts us to do what's best, and what's best is making sure it's managed properly. For us. I mean, why is she even still alive, holding on to all that? It's just sitting there, doing nothing." The words hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole my breath. Why is she even still alive? The world tilted. My heart, which had been beating a steady rhythm of quiet observation, now raced, a frantic drum against my ribs. My hands, resting in my lap, began to tremble uncontrollably. A wave of nausea washed over me, making the vibrant colors of the garden blur into a sickly green. I felt physically sick, a cold dread spreading through my veins. This wasn't just casual dismissiveness. This was a brutal, dehumanizing calculation. They weren't just talking about my money. They were talking about me, my very existence, as an inconvenience, a delay to their inheritance. More laughter. I heard Julia say, "Well, it's not like she's going to live forever. And when she's gone, that house alone will be worth a fortune." "Plus the savings," Ethan added, his voice smug. "We've got it all locked down with the trust. No surprises." The humiliation was overwhelming. They were laughing about my impending death, about the money they expected to inherit, about the trust I had so naively signed, believing it was an act of love. My mind reeled. The woman who had given them everything, who had sacrificed her own dreams for their futures, was now a mere obstacle, a ticking clock to their financial gain. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling like jelly. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, to escape this brutal revelation. I couldn't face them, couldn't pretend to be the oblivious matriarch any longer. The air felt thick, suffocating. I needed to breathe, to get away from their cruel words, their casual contempt. My survival instinct, dormant for so long under layers of self-sacrifice, finally kicked in. I moved towards the gate, my steps faltering, my vision blurred by unshed tears. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't make an excuse. I simply walked away, a broken woman, but with a fierce, burning ember of determination igniting in my chest. I didn't know what I would do, but I knew with absolute certainty that I could not let their betrayal define me. I had to reclaim my dignity, whatever the cost. The drive home from Ethan's barbecue was a blur of hot tears and fragmented thoughts. The words, "Why is she even still alive?" echoed in my head, each syllable a fresh stab. My hands, still trembling, gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I felt hollowed out, as if all the love and sacrifice I'd poured into my children had been siphoned away, leaving nothing but a gaping, painful void. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the familiar comfort of my little house felt alien. I stumbled inside, the silence deafening after the cacophony of their laughter. I sank onto the sofa, the tears now streaming freely, hot and relentless. Betrayal, that was the word. Not just neglect, not just dismissiveness, but a cold, calculated betrayal of the trust I had so freely given. My own children, wishing me gone. But beneath the crushing weight of heartbreak, a flicker of something new began to stir. A hard, cold resolve. I had spent my entire life accommodating, giving, understanding. No more. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next morning, the phone rang. It was Julia. "Mom, are you okay? You left so suddenly last night." Her voice sounded a little concerned, but I detected an underlying irritation. "I wasn't feeling well," I said, my voice flat, devoid of its usual warmth. "Oh, well, I was wondering if you could watch Lily and Sarah again this Friday. I have a charity gala, and Ethan has a late meeting." A week ago, I would have said yes without a second thought, already planning what snacks to buy, what games to play. But the image of them laughing, discussing my death, flashed before my eyes. "No, Julia," I said, the words feeling strange on my tongue. "I can't. I have plans." A beat of silence. "Plans? What plans?" she asked, her tone shifting from mild concern to outright annoyance. "Just plans," I repeated, my resolve hardening. "I'm not available." "But, Mom, it's just for one night. You always do it." "Not this time," I said, and before she could argue further, I gently hung up the phone. My heart hammered, a mix of guilt and a strange, fierce pride. It was a small act, but it felt monumental. Later that week, Ethan called, his voice smooth and persuasive. "Mom, about that loan I mentioned, things are really tight right now. Could you transfer that money we talked about, just for a few weeks?" "No, Ethan," I said, my voice steadier this time. "I can't. My money is not available." "What do you mean, not available? And he demanded, his tone turning sharp. "It's in the trust. We're the trustees. We can access it." "No, you are the trustees for me," I corrected, a new clarity in my voice. "And I say it's not available. I need it for myself." He sputtered, clearly taken aback. "Mom, you're being unreasonable. What's gotten into you?" "I'm being careful," I replied, echoing his own word from the barbecue. "Something I should have been doing all along." I hung up, my hand still trembling, but this time it was from a surge of defiant strength. A few days later, as I was watering the petunias on my porch, my next-door neighbor, Margaret, a kind woman in her late 60s who had recently moved in, walked by with her dog. "Good morning, Alma," she said, her smile warm. "You look a little pensive. Everything all right?" I hadn't realized how much I needed to talk. The words tumbled out, a censored version of the pain, enough for her to understand the gist. I spoke of feeling unseen, unappreciated. She listened patiently, nodding occasionally, her eyes full of genuine empathy. "Oh, Alma," she said softly, reaching out to gently squeeze my arm. "That's a heavy burden to carry. Sometimes the hardest thing we do is learn to put ourselves first, especially when we've spent a lifetime doing the opposite." Her simple kindness was a balm to my wounded spirit, a reminder that not everyone viewed me as a burden. That evening, I found an old, leather-bound journal tucked away in a drawer. It had been a gift from Arthur years ago, meant for recording my sewing designs, but I'd never used it. Now, I opened it, the blank pages inviting. I began to write, pouring out my heart onto the crisp paper. I wrote about Arthur, about my children, about the sacrifices, the love, and now the crushing betrayal. I wrote about the trust papers, about Ethan's words, about Julia's dismissiveness. I reflected on all the manipulations I had overlooked, the casual entitlement I had enabled. Each word was a release, each sentence a step towards understanding. I saw patterns I had ignored, heard echoes of conversations I had dismissed. The journal became my confidant, a silent witness to my pain, and slowly to my awakening. I realized that for too long, my identity had been tied to being the family bank, the reliable babysitter, the advice giver. Now, in the quiet solitude of my home, I began to see Alma, the woman, separate from her roles. I had to focus on my own needs, to reclaim the self I had lost in the service of others. The path ahead felt uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope, a quiet strength blooming in the aftermath of devastation. The journal became my daily ritual, a quiet space where I could untangle the knots of my past. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. My children called less frequently, their initial annoyance at my refusal to help giving way to a chilly silence. It hurt, but the pain was now laced with a growing sense of liberation. I was learning to breathe again, to exist for myself. One rainy afternoon, while rummaging through the dusty boxes in my attic, I stumbled upon an old wooden chest, tucked away behind a stack of Arthur's fishing gear. It was heavy, and when I finally wrestled it open, I found it filled with his old papers, military records, faded photographs, and a stack of financial documents I hadn't looked at in decades. Among them, nestled in a crisp, yellowing envelope, was a life insurance policy. My heart gave a little jolt as I pulled it out. It was from a company I barely remembered, taken out years ago, before Ethan was even born. I unfolded the document, my eyes scanning the fine print, and then I saw it. The payout amount, $250,000, and the beneficiary, Alma Mitchell, solely in my name. I sank onto an old trunk, the policy clutched in my trembling hands, $250,000. My mind reeled. Arthur had always been so private about finances, especially after his small business took off. He'd handled everything, always assuring me we were comfortable. But this was a staggering sum I had no idea existed. It wasn't part of the savings I'd dipped into for the children, nor was it part of the assets I'd unknowingly placed into the family trust. This was separate. This was mine. A wave of emotions washed over me. Shock, disbelief, then a profound sense of empowerment. This wasn't just money. It was freedom. It was a tangible representation of the independence I had unknowingly possessed all along. I remembered conversations with Arthur, late at night, planning our future. "We'll always make sure the kids are set," he'd said. "But you, Alma, you need to be secure. You've worked harder than anyone." He talked about building a legacy, about giving back to the community that had given us so much. He'd always believed in the power of education, especially for girls, having seen how my own mother, a bright woman, had been limited by her lack of opportunities. Now, looking at this policy, his words took on a new, prescient meaning. He hadn't just secured my future, he'd given me the means to define it. The next morning, I called Clara. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice tight with suppressed excitement. "I've found something." Clara, ever the steady presence, listened patiently as I recounted my discovery. "Alma, that's incredible," she exclaimed, her voice filled with genuine joy. "Arthur was a smart man. He knew what he was doing. But what do I do now?" I asked, the practicalities starting to weigh on me. "I need to understand what this means, legally." "You need a lawyer, a good one," Clara advised. "Someone who will listen to you, Alma. Someone who respects you, not just your money." She gave me the name of a local attorney, a woman named Ms. Davies, who had a reputation for being sharp and compassionate. Making that first appointment felt like stepping into a new world. Ms. Davies' office was bright and welcoming. She was a kind-faced woman in her late 40s with intelligent eyes that met mine directly. I told her my story, from the early sacrifices to the casual dismissals, the trust papers, and finally, the discovery of the policy. I watched her face, expecting judgment, but found only understanding. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, her voice calm and firm, "what your children did with that trust, while legally complex, was a profound breach of your trust. But this life insurance policy is entirely separate. It's yours, free and clear. You have complete control over it." She explained the nuances of the trust I had signed, confirming my fears that it had indeed given Ethan and Julia significant control over my other assets. But she also assured me there were ways to regain some of that control, to protect what was left. She treated me not as a frail old woman, but as an intelligent individual who deserved respect and agency. Her validation was a powerful tonic. Over the next few days, I started gathering evidence of my contributions. As Ms. Davies suggested, old bank statements showing transfers to Ethan's business, receipts for Julia's medical bills, letters from Phil's art school acknowledging my tuition payments. Each document was a painful reminder of my past generosity, but also a solidifying testament to my self-worth. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about reclaiming my narrative, proving to myself that I was not and never had been a burden. I was a giver, a provider, and now I was ready to be my own protector. With Ms. Davies' guidance, I began to make moves that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The first step was to open new bank accounts, completely separate from anything tied to the trust. The $250,000 from Arthur's life insurance policy was deposited there, a solid, undeniable foundation of my newfound independence. Then came the will. Ms. Davies meticulously drafted a new one, ensuring that my wishes would be honored and that the bulk of my assets, including the proceeds from my house when it eventually sold, would be directed away from the trust and towards a cause I now held dear. The most difficult, yet most empowering step was confronting the family about the trust. Ms. Davies advised me on how to approach it, emphasizing my rights while acknowledging the legal complexities of what I had signed. I decided to send a formal letter drafted by Ms. Davies, informing Ethan and Julia that I was revoking their access to my personal bank accounts and that all financial decisions regarding the trust would now require my explicit written consent. It was a legal formality, but it felt like drawing a line in the sand. The call started almost immediately. Ethan was furious. "What is this, Mom? You're cutting us off after everything we've done for you?" His voice was laced with a venom I hadn't heard before, a raw entitlement that stripped away any pretense of concern. "I'm protecting myself, Ethan," I said, my voice steady, though my heart pounded. "I've decided to manage my own finances." "Manage your own finances," he scoffed. "You signed the trust for a reason. We're doing what's best for you." "What's best for me is my decision now," I countered, the words feeling like a shield. "And I've decided that means I control my own money." Julia called too, her tone more pleading, but equally manipulative. "Mom, please think about this. Ethan's business is really struggling. We just need a little help to get through this rough patch. You know how much we rely on you." "I know," I said, a bitter taste in my mouth. "And that's precisely why things need to change. My resources are for my needs now." The pressure intensified. Ethan showed up at my door, unannounced, demanding to see my bank statements, to review my spending. "You're being irresponsible, Mom," he declared, his face flushed with anger. "You're going to squander everything." "This is my home, Ethan," I said, standing tall, my hands clasped firmly in front of me. "And my money. You have no right to demand anything from me." I felt a surge of adrenaline, a powerful sense of self-possession I hadn't known I was capable of. For the first time, I wasn't shrinking from his anger. I was meeting it head on. Lydia was with him, looking uncomfortable, her eyes darting between us. She didn't speak, but her silence felt like a small victory. Even Phil, who had been largely absent, called, his voice laced with confusion. "Mom, what's going on? Ethan's freaking out. He says you're cutting everyone off." "I'm just taking control of my life, Phil," I explained, trying to keep my voice calm, something I should have done a long time ago. Phil, to his credit, listened more than he argued, a flicker of understanding in his voice. "I don't know, Mom," he said slowly. "Ethan can be a real jerk sometimes. Just be careful." His words, though still somewhat vague, felt like the first crack in the wall of family entitlement. The family's panic was palpable. They had taken my generosity for granted for so long, had built their own financial comfort on the assumption of my endless wellspring of support. Now, that wellspring was drying up, and they were scrambling. I heard through the grapevine from a mutual friend that Ethan was having serious cash flow problems with his business, that Julia was worried about making ends meet without my regular gifts. The consequences of their actions and their reliance on my support were finally starting to unfold. I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and anxiety. The exhilaration of finally standing up for myself, of reclaiming my dignity and my resources. The anxiety of the unknown fallout, of the potential for even greater conflict. But as I sat in my quiet sewing room, the afternoon sun warming my face, I reassured myself. This was the path to reclaiming my life, to honoring Arthur's true legacy, and to finally finding peace. The threads of my life, once tangled and frayed by others' demands, were now being rewoven, stronger and more vibrant than ever before. The following spring, my house, the one that had been the backdrop to so many family memories and ultimately so much pain, was sold. It was a bittersweet moment watching the sold sign go up, but it also felt like a shedding of an old skin. With the proceeds and the life insurance money, I made a significant donation to establish the Alma Mitchell Scholarship Fund for underprivileged girls in Willow Creek. Ms. Davies handled all the legalities, ensuring the fund was robust and sustainable, a true legacy. I didn't move far, just across town to a lovely, smaller house in a vibrant community for active seniors. It had a bright sunroom perfect for my sewing, a small garden, and, most importantly, neighbors who smiled and chatted, genuinely interested in my day. Clara, of course, was a frequent visitor, her friendship a constant source of strength and laughter. Margaret, my kind neighbor, often joined us for tea, her insights always welcome. I found myself joining a local book club, taking art classes, pursuits I'd always put off for someday. Someday, it turned out, was now. Meanwhile, the consequences for my children began to unfold. Ethan's business, without my infusions of cash, hit a rough patch. I heard through the grapevine that he'd had to lay off some employees and was struggling to secure new financing. Julia, who had always relied on my financial safety net, found herself having to budget carefully, something she hadn't truly had to do before. The casual vacations and expensive hobbies became a distant memory. I saw her at the grocery store once, and she looked tired, her usual sparkle dimmed. She didn't approach me, just gave a quick, almost imperceptible nod. Lydia, however, was a different story. A few weeks after I moved, she came to my new house, unannounced. She looked hesitant, almost fragile. "Alma," she began, her voice soft. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything, for not speaking up, for letting Ethan treat you the way he did." Tears welled in her eyes. "I saw it. I did. I was afraid of him, afraid of losing my own security." She confessed that she had started working part-time, trying to make up for Ethan's financial struggles, and that she was seriously reevaluating her marriage. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a genuine apology, a crack in the wall of their entitlement, and it meant something. Phil, my artist son, surprised me the most. He showed up one afternoon with a small, beautifully framed painting, a vibrant depiction of my old sewing room, bathed in sunlight. "Mom," he said, his eyes earnest, "I know I haven't been around much, and I'm sorry for that. But I always knew you were a good person, and what Ethan and Julia did, it wasn't right. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." He didn't ask for money, didn't make excuses. He just offered his art and his quiet support. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a true connection, a thread rewoven with care. The scholarship fund quickly gained traction in Willow Creek. The local paper ran a story highlighting Arthur's legacy and my dedication to empowering young women. The first cohort of scholarship recipients were announced at a small community ceremony in the town hall. I stood on the stage, surrounded by the bright, hopeful faces of the girls whose futures I was helping to shape. Clara was there, beaming, and even Phil had come, standing quietly at the back. As I looked out at the audience, I saw a few familiar faces from my old life, some of whom looked genuinely surprised, others perhaps a little ashamed. I didn't see Ethan or Julia, They had been invited, of course, but had declined. Their absence, once a source of deep pain, now felt like a quiet confirmation. They had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. Back in my sunroom, I sat by my sewing machine, working on a new quilt. Each patch was a different color, a different texture, symbolizing the varied experiences of my life. There were squares of deep, vibrant blues for the new peace I found, bright yellows for the joy of my friendships, and even a few muted grays, acknowledging the pain, but now edged with silver, representing resilience. It wasn't just a quilt. It was a tapestry of my new life, each stitch a testament to independence, strength, and the transformative power of choosing myself. The true meaning of family, I realized, wasn't just about blood. It was about respect, about love, about seeing and valuing each other for who we are, not what we can provide. I was surrounded by friends who appreciated me, by a community I was actively helping to build, and by the quiet, steady hum of my sewing machine, weaving a future that was truly, beautifully my own.